miss your grandmother?
I do actually, yeah, I do miss my grandmother. And my grandfather, particularly being in Windsor. For me, Windsor is hers. Sometimes I'd come round and have a bit of tea with her because she had the best teas ever, so I used to get well fed.
Something explosive happened inside the British monarchy, and the palace tried to keep it quiet. On February 3rd, 2026, Buckingham Palace released what looked like a simple two-paragraph announcement. Calm, formal, almost boring. But behind those polite royal words was a decision so shocking it rippled through palace corridors, legal offices, and aristocratic circles across Britain like a thunderclap. Prince William had just been named the sole beneficiary of one of the most secret and historically powerful private estates connected to the monarchy. Not Sandringham, not Balmoral, not Windsor. Something far older. Something Queen Elizabeth II had protected for decades. And when Queen Camilla and her son Tom Parker Bowles realized what had been transferred, and more importantly what had been deliberately kept away from them, insiders say the atmosphere inside palace walls turned icy overnight. This wasn't just about land. This was about power, legacy, and the final strategic move of Queen Elizabeth II. Because the estate at the center of the storm had existed in secrecy for more than 80 years. The story actually begins during the darkest days of World War II. In 1944, King George VI quietly purchased a large property hidden deep inside the Chiltern Hills, right along the border of Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire. The place was known as the Cedar Estate, but here's what made it extraordinary. From the moment it was acquired, the estate was designed to disappear. There was no official royal registry entry, no press coverage, no ceremonial unveiling, no public acknowledgement at all. For more than 8 decades, the Cedar Estate lived almost like a ghost inside royal history. Only a tiny circle of senior courtiers even knew it existed. Everyone else simply assumed it was another quiet woodland somewhere in the countryside. But why would the royal family keep an entire estate secret for 80 years? That question lingered for decades, until February 3rd, 2026. That morning, briefing notes were circulated among members of the Royal Correspondent Guild. What those documents described stunned even veteran royal historians, because Cedar Estate was far more than land. Inside the property sat a private chapel containing an engraved memorial vault listing royal family members who served in armed conflict. Deep beneath the estate were archival chambers holding 186 oak chests filled with wartime correspondence and confidential royal communications. There were 72 previously undisclosed royal portraits, including never-before-seen oil paintings of King George VI and Princess Margaret. But perhaps the most astonishing discovery of all, 14 sealed audio recordings. Private conversations between Queen Elizabeth II and some of the most powerful figures of the 20th century, Winston Churchill, Nelson Mandela, Ronald Reagan, and Charles de Gaulle. One longtime archivist described the collection with a phrase that still echoes through palace halls. This isn't a museum of history, this is the raw architecture of royal memory. It was a window into the monarchy's private soul. And there was one person Queen Elizabeth had quietly been preparing to inherit it, Prince William. Between 2017 and 2021, William made regular private visits to Cedar Estate, not for photographs, not for ceremony, for work. He walked the cedar groves alongside his grandmother. He studied wartime letters stored in the archives. He helped catalog naval dispatches from the Second World War. At one point, he personally reorganized hundreds of letters written by soldiers to the royal family during wartime. And in an almost symbolic moment, he even repaired moisture control systems protecting the archival chambers. This wasn't a prince visiting a historic property. This was a future king learning how to protect history. Queen Elizabeth noticed. Inside a handwritten annotation discovered later within the Covenant Trust documents, she wrote a sentence that would eventually define everything that followed. He will inherit more than the crown. He will inherit the silence that preserved it. Those words weren't poetic decoration. They were a decision. Because the legal structure protecting Cedar Estate was just as secretive as the property itself. The estate was not part of the Crown Estate. It was not under the Duchy of Cornwall. Instead, Queen Elizabeth created something entirely different in 2020. A private legal mechanism called a Covenant Trust. Filed under Charter Seal 0142, the trust was witnessed by her personal solicitor, a constitutional advisor, and a notary from the Royal Archives. But the trust came with a remarkable safeguard, a delayed activation clause. It would only activate after 2 specific events occurred. First, the completion of Queen Elizabeth II's state funeral. Second, Prince William's public recognition as heir to the monarchy's institutional responsibilities. When both conditions were fulfilled, the estate would automatically transfer to him. And on February 3rd, 2026, Buckingham Palace palace confirmed that moment had arrived. The official statement read simply, "Under the terms of the sealed covenant trust executed by Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II in 2020, the property known as the Cedar Estate shall pass in full and exclusive guardianship to His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, effective immediately." A few lines of text. But the consequences were enormous, because while William received the estate quietly, not everyone inside the royal family welcomed the news. For years, insiders say Queen Camilla and her son Tom Parker Bowles had been quietly trying to bring the Cedar Estate under their influence. Beginning in late 2024, Camilla had started advocating internally for something she described as a Windsor Cultural Legacy Center. On paper, it sounded noble. Gourmet retreats celebrating British culinary traditions, literary salons honoring female royal history, small guided tours through the cedar groves. But beneath the cultural language was a different vision. Tom Parker Bowles reportedly saw the estate as something else entirely, a brand. Internal memos later reviewed by royal insiders suggested he had been developing a commercial strategy involving a Michelin-grade tasting restaurant inside the estate's historic hunting lodge. There was even talk of launching an artisanal food line called Royal Wild, cedar-aged cheeses, estate honey, wild trout, seasonal wines, private dining events for elite guests, a luxury hospitality brand wrapped in royal heritage. And then, on October 18th, 2025, something happened that changed everything. A leaked briefing note revealed Tom's legal team had been exploring whether parts of Cedar Estate could be reclassified under public heritage law. If successful, that classification could weaken William's exclusive control and potentially open the estate to shared management. In other words, a royal sanctuary could suddenly become a commercial project. By November 2025, Camilla hosted a private reception near Henley-on-Thames. Officially, it celebrated rural sustainability, but guests later described it differently. One attendee called it a trial balloon, a preview of a future model where Camilla's charitable foundation and outside investors might help manage Cedar Estate. When Prince William heard about the gathering, he didn't argue publicly. He simply declined the invitation. 3 weeks later, he activated the Covenant Trust, and Cedar Estate officially became his. But that was only the beginning, because another estate, one Camilla believed she was already close to securing, was about to slip through her fingers as well. On January 31st, 2026, land registry documents quietly updated to reflect a second transfer. Northacre Hall, a massive 1,200-acre heritage property nestled between Wiltshire and Berkshire, surrounded by ancient hedgerows and rolling countryside. Historically, it had served as a discreet royal retreat, hosting hunting weekends and quiet diplomatic meetings during Queen Elizabeth II's reign. But its real value lay in something else. Commercial analysts estimated its licensing rights alone could reach $48 million over 10 years, and Camilla and Tom had been quietly planning to use it. In 2023, they reportedly began lobbying to transform Northacre Hall into a luxury culinary heritage destination. Plans included a boutique hotel, a royal cooking school, a farm-to-table brand attracting global investors. But Queen Elizabeth had anticipated something like this long before. Documents dated September 8, 2022, just weeks before her death, revealed she had secretly reclassified Northacre Hall as a personal sovereign holding. That single decision allowed her to pass the estate privately through her will, and she chose William. In a handwritten appendix labeled R3, she explained the reasoning with remarkable clarity. "Let Northacre remain with the child who bears the burden of our future." The transfer bypassed both King Charles and Princess Anne. Inside palace circles, the move caused shock. It was the first private royal estate transfer of its kind since Queen Victoria reorganized her Highland properties in 1872. And once again, Camilla's plans were quietly dismantled before they could even begin. But the most emotional and explosive battle over royal estates was still ahead. Because the next property Queen Elizabeth protected would ignite one of the most tense confrontations inside the palace in years. The tension inside the royal household was already thick by early 2026, but what Princess Anne discovered in mid-January pushed the situation into completely new territory. Inside Windsor Castle's Oak Room, Anne had been quietly reviewing her late mother's private correspondence. The Queen had left behind thousands of letters, handwritten directives, and sealed folios that required careful cataloging before they could be transferred into the royal archives. Most of the documents were routine. Then Anne found something different, folded 3 times and tucked inside a dark leather folio stamped with the initials WWG. Was a document unlike anything the royal family had seen before. It was a codicil, and it concerned a property almost no one had heard mentioned inside palace discussions for decades. Clarence Hill Estate. The estate sat deep inside the Chiltern Hills, hidden behind dense woodland and reachable only through a private 4-mile driveway that branched off a quiet rural road. The property had been quietly purchased in 1947 by King George VI and intentionally kept off most royal property registries. The purpose was simple. Clarence Hill was meant to be a private private reserve for direct heirs to the throne, completely insulated from parliamentary oversight, public funding structures, and the political complications that often surrounded crown estates. Queen Elizabeth's handwritten directive inside the codicil was clear, deliberate, and deeply personal. I entrust Clarence Hill to my grandson William in full title and spirit, free of encumbrance, free of shadow. Let it remain outside the crown estate, immune to politics, immune to scandal. This land is a covenant, not a commodity. Those words carried enormous weight. Sources inside the palace later explained that Elizabeth had grown increasingly worried during her final years about the reputational storm surrounding certain members of the royal family. Prince Andrew's scandals had shaken public confidence. Prince Harry's explosive media ventures had created ongoing controversy. Elizabeth feared the monarchy's legacy might become entangled in spectacle and commercialism. Clarence Hill was meant to remain untouched by all of that. It would become a sanctuary for William and Catherine, a place where the next generation of the royal family could grow and reflect without interference. But when Camilla learned about the transfer on January 20th, 2026, the reaction inside Highgrove reportedly turned explosive. According to palace insiders, she immediately summoned her legal advisors and her son Tom Parker Bowles. Tom had just suffered a serious setback involving a publishing contract connected to his culinary brand, which had recently faced scrutiny over the use of a royal crest. Clarence Hill, in Camilla's mind, was not simply a protected family refuge. It was an opportunity. Internal emails that later leaked revealed the idea she proposed to her advisors. Imagine the launch, she reportedly wrote. From the Queen's Garden to yours, within days a new company had been registered, Hill and Crown Limited. Tom Parker Bowles was listed as executive director. The proposal outlined an ambitious plan to transform Clarence Hill into a luxury agricultural and hospitality brand. The concept revolved around regenerative luxury, combining boutique eco-lodges, high-end farm-to-table dining experiences, and sustainability programs marketed to wealthy international guests. The vision positioned Tom as a sort of culinary ambassador for what the proposal described as Green Britain. There was just one problem. The codicil transferring Clarence Hill to William had already been notarized and secured within the moment the transfer became public. Camilla called an emergency meeting with Tom and two legal advisors. According to leaked palace notes, they briefly considered challenging the will by questioning the Queen's mental clarity at the time the trust had been created. The idea never advanced because King Charles issued a private warning. Any attempt to undermine Elizabeth's will, he reportedly said, would be treated as an attack on the crown's memory itself. Within hours, the conversation ended. On the morning of February 3rd, 2026, Prince William arrived at the gates of Greenheath alone. No cameras, no press, just a navy coat and a single aide beside him. There, standing beside the estate's iron gates, he signed the charter, creating the Greenheath Royal Future Trust. The estate would remain permanently closed to commercial exploitation. As he finished signing the document, a Rolls-Royce appeared at the far end of the road. Queen Camilla stepped out. She said nothing. She didn't approach. She simply stood there silently watching the moment unfold. Because by then, the truth had become unavoidable. Queen Elizabeth II had spent years building an intricate legal fortress around her grandson, estate by estate, clause by clause, anticipating every possible challenge.